Why is it that the Old Testament stories have stood the test of time?
We're all interested in stories, just like we all love a joke. We love the tension of a story. And they have stood the test of time fundamentally because the main hero of the story is God. And God's name means I am. And it means he is the ultimate reality. He was, he is, he will be, he is.
He's
And
never out
all
of
that
date.
he's never out of date, and all that he is, and that has to be revealed to us in Scripture. He says, I am who I am. You can't liken me to anybody else. You have to know me as I reveal myself to you. A God of grace, a God of love, a God of truth, a God of justice. Everything that our hearts need. Well, the stories are really the struggles of people to believe God. And I think we all face those struggles. So in the midst of adversity, every story has what we call a protagonist, the the main character, and his opposition, the antagonist. And there's always a tension in a story that's moving toward a climax, where this tension between good and evil comes to a climactic moment. And it's true to our lives. It exemplifies our lives where we struggle to live by faith. And sometimes there's a climactic moment, and we find the reality of God's presence with us.
Let's talk about that issue of tension. Many stories in life, and specifically the stories of the Old Testament, do move forward on the basis of some type of crisis or tension coming into the story. I remember with my daughter, when she was younger, we would watch a movie on television or a tape or something like that, and it would come to the scary part where the music changed and things seemed to be going wrong, and I would turn to her as a little 4 or 5 year old and say, it's okay, this is the crisis, it's going to get better, because she would be getting afraid at that point. And it seems to me, as we read the Old Testament stories, we may be puzzled as we're trying to enter the story. It causes some tension, but tension isn't necessarily a bad thing when we're reading the Bible.
No, attention is absolutely essential to life, to develop us. In other words, it's through that dynamic of opposition that we develop. We learn to trust. Our character is developed. If God answered our prayers immediately, it would destroy us because we would use God. He'd become like a genie in Aladdin's lamp. And so the result of that would be that we would become even more selfish, and God would become our slave. By his not rewarding virtue immediately, or punishing vice immediately, he develops character. That's why Paul says, we glory in tribulation, knowing that it works this character of perseverance, endurance, hope, a hope that will not be made ashamed. And so tensions are really necessary to our own development. People are troubled by evil, but without evil, we wouldn't know good. All of life we know by contrast. Without contrast, we don't understand black. If everything's black, you don't know it's black. It's only when you have white. And so it is these tensions of life. And they're not always resolved the way we would like them to be resolved the first time. But that's to development of our character. We become the better for it. So I think the other thing is that the stories enable us to see life whole. We can identify with ourselves within the story at a given moment, but we can't see clearly. The story gives us a beginning and an ending, and we see how it turns out. But the reality of life is we really never see how it turns out until we're with our Lord. Then finally we'll see the whole scope of what we've been through.
I think about the story of Joseph. It's easy for us to read through those chapters where Joseph has been put in prison, and we know what's coming if we've read the Bible at all. But if you read the details, Joseph actually spent a number of years in prison just waiting. He's in what I would call the in-between time, between the point of injustice and the point of God dealing justly with the situation. So he's living in that moment where we live a lot of our Christian lives.
That's right.
We often live in the in-between time, don't we?
Yes, we do. I remember one time in class, we were reading Genesis 37 in the Hebrew text. And I'd made the point that every detail in this story is there for a purpose. And we came to the point where Joseph goes up to see his brothers. Jacob had sent to see how they're faring at Shechem, where they had had quite a fiasco, as you recall. And so naturally he would worry about his sons at Shechem. And when Joseph gets to Shechem, the brothers are not there. And we're told he was wandering around in a field, and a man happened to see him. And then he asked him, "Where are my brothers?" He told them they were up in Dothan. So the student asked me, "What's this wandering around in the field? What's the purpose of that?" And I realized the purpose of it was that we might understand that in providence, sometimes it seems like you're wasting time. It's meaningless time. But the reality is, if he hadn't wasted time there, he would have arrived too early. But he arrived at just the right moment. And so that wandering around in the field was absolutely essential to his meeting the Midianites who would take him down into Egypt, that would lead to his exaltation and all that was involved. So I've had students tell me how helpful that was to them when they're going through life and they seem to be spinning their wheels, wasting time. Even that's part of God's providence. But that's the thing about a story, see, because you can identify with that and you can see how it turns out. And that gives you hope. It gives us those transcendent values that the human heart is yearning for, because God is the reality that we can trust in.